we got quorum. I'd like to bring the meeting to order, and we'll start by with introduction of the members, and I'll start with Mr. Wynot.
Good morning, Matt Wynot, MLA, Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Brian Scabar, MLA for Cumberland North.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Howard Epstein, MLA for Halifax, Chebucto.
Andrew Younger, Dartmouth East.
Anne MacDonald, Assistant Auditor General.
Ava Zappalay, Senior Executive Director, Higher Education Branch.
Laurie Bennett, Director of Financial Planning.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome our guests this morning. And Ms. Zappalay, are you prepared to make an opening statement on behalf of your department?
I actually hadn't anticipated that the deputy wouldn't be here, so I don't actually have the speech, but I can spare you the detailed remarks. I'll just say that I've worked in the higher education branch since August 1st, and the system encompasses both the 10 universities, the 13 campus community college, and the private sector career colleges. There are 49 of them, and so we have a wealth of education and training options available in Nova Scotia, but it also presents a challenge to managing the system. And you've seen in the media reports, and likely you've heard here in the House, the challenges that we face on a regular basis in managing such a large system. And in recent months, we've put a lot of emphasis on working with the institutions to encourage them to develop sustainable plans so that they can continue to offer quality education to the students and a quality education experience to the public while at the same time living within their means. So we'll look forward to any questions that we can answer.
Okay. We'll start with Mr. Younger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're going to be able to answer questions on behalf of the department, I guess?
I can with my trusty friend Laurie here.
Okay. Maybe I'd like to get an idea of, I know that the government has expressed concern over the debt levels at NSCAD. I guess I'll just start there. Can you tell me what the debt levels are at the other universities in the province, or debt and deficit? Because I guess they're more concerned with the deficit level at NSCAD than the debt, although they're intrinsically tied.
Well, to give, first of all, to take it to a high level,
sure.
The collective debt of the university sector in Nova Scotia is about $300 million. And also if you look at the deferred maintenance debt, that's where they don't keep the buildings to the degree that's desirable. It's around $800 million. So that alone can give you a sense of the state that the system is in terms of debt. NSCAD has chosen to take its issues with the debt public, and so it's more visible. But definitely Acadia and St. FX also have issues with managing their budget.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't it be fair to say that NSCAD has taken theirs public because the government has taken a more active role in the NSCAD situation than perhaps it has in, say, Acadia or St. FX, for example? Would that be a fair? I
think with Acadia, we're actively engaged as well. With St. FX, it's just recently come to our attention that their debt is at the level that it is, and that came through the media as well.
Okay. What options are being looked at for managing the debt of these universities?
We're actively working.
And I know you're not going to write them a check and pay it off. Like that's not what I mean by that. Yeah. So I just, but obviously you're having discussions with them to try and address this issue. Well,
to go back to your original question regarding NSCAD, the government has supplied NSCAD with about $17 million in special funding above and beyond their share of the operating grant over the last several years, and so that's not sustainable. We would like NSCAD to develop a plan where it can show how it's going to go forward, managing its budget within the envelope that government supplies to it, without coming forward every year with requests for special funding to help them help them top up their operating deficit, or budget.
Okay, and I agree. Okay, I agree in principle that you want to get to the point where people aren't coming for extra money all the time, and that, I don't think that that's unique to the university sector. I think that's probably the same in. I know it's the same problem in many of the cultural sectors where, you want to get them on a sustainable foundation, and that's the goal. But as you noted, you're looking at roughly a $300 million total debt among the universities, give or take, plus the deferred maintenance of $800 million. And the deferred maintenance is a serious issue. It's relative to different universities how serious it is, but it's serious for all of them to some extent. But the funding has been cut to those universities by 3% in each of the past 3 years. I don't think it's 3 years, right?
It's a total of 10% over 3 years.
Okay, so total of 10% over 3 years. Which obviously the effect of that is to put more pressure on the deferred maintenance cost, because that's generally the easiest place. Unfortunately, it's the easiest place to say, we'll put that off for a year, fixing the roof, or if you have a university like Dalhousie, or for that matter, even St. FX or Acadia, they have older buildings and older facilities. So I guess what I'd like to get at is what it strikes me that the side effect of cutting the university grants 10% over the 3 years would be to increase the pressure on the deferred maintenance deficit that you talked about at the beginning. But then at the same time, you're trying to create a situation where the universities aren't coming back and asking for special funding, but
We're trying to also create a situation where the universities are taking costs permanently out of the system, and we're encouraging them to work collaboratively and to come up with innovative solutions. So you're probably aware of the Excellence and Innovation Fund, the $25 million fund that's been set up. And initially, the universities came forward with fairly small projects related to energy savings, but we saw some momentum build this year where the projects became much more collaborative, frankly, and more creative, and working towards significant cost savings. So, for example, looking at shared IT services, shared library services, setting up a common application portal. So they're moving in a direction where we're hoping that they look at sustainability, living within their means, but also working closer together and collaborating wherever possible to take permanent costs out of the system.
And I think that that makes sense. I think that sort of thing can address the operating, the annual operating costs, but the deferred maintenance issue and the existing debt already exists. So what my concern is that we can look and say, all right, we're going to reduce the costs of X university by 3%, and we're going to help them find cost efficiencies through any of the things that you've talked about. And I think those make sense. You know, the shared IT, the libraries used to be actually more shared than they are now. So getting back to more shared libraries, all that makes sense, and will reduce the operating costs. But because their grant is being cut at the same time, that's not giving them extra money that they can put into addressing the $800 million in deferred maintenance or paying down their debt, because they've seen their power bills increase by roughly 30%, give or take. They pay different rates depending on which university it is, but roughly 30% over the past 4 years. Dalhousie, for example, which may be the only one that's on natural gas, switched to natural gas to save money, and of course then they got hit by the deep Panook coming down and had a massive gas bill this year. They're getting hit by costs that exceed the savings that they're going to achieve short term, plus the deferred maintenance bill is growing. So I'm just trying to get at that disconnect and how we address it, because I agree that long term part of it has to be getting the operating savings, but at the same time it strikes me that those operating savings are helping them deal with the 3% cut, perhaps, but their deferred maintenance bill is still growing.
Did you want to answer that, Deputy, or should I keep going?
Do I need to?
Ms. McKenzie?
I apologize for being late.
I've been late too, so it's okay.
Oh, okay. In response to the issue that you've raised, there's an assumption that they would have used the 25 million perhaps to have put against deferred maintenance. The reality is that there wasn't money being put against deferred maintenance over time. So, and I'm not sure, and I apologize for this, what Ava covered, but I'm sure that Ava has spoken to the fact that what's the challenge that we're currently having with post-secondary education is being had in every province. It's being had in every country. So currently, the way that Nova Scotia has approached it is to bring the universities to a table under a memorandum of understanding, looking at what is turning out to be a very modest reduction in comparison to other provinces in Canada, where there's been $140 million hits in 1 year in Alberta, and I can go through a number of other provinces where there's been no time, no collaboration, no opportunity to plan, no innovation fund that's been put in place to be able to do some of this sort of the offset planning. What you're identifying are big, huge issues, and Nova Scotia taxpayers are committed to a strong post-secondary system. The reality is we have 10 universities in the province of Nova Scotia, and the strength in the Memorandum of Understanding is that table where we come together to be able to take on and address some of those issues. So deferred maintenance is certainly some of the things that we've been discussing.
And I agree, and I didn't want to suggest that the 25 million would have gone into deferred maintenance. I guess what my concern was is that the 3% might have. Might not have. We don't know, obviously, but what my concern was is that that deferred maintenance bill is continuing to grow every year because you can go to any university in this province, talk to any university president, and they're still not putting much money into the deferred maintenance issue because it's the easy place to save money. And then the other issue they have, now I know that some universities, there's different numbers of international students at different universities, but they have, because the cap on tuition increases doesn't apply to graduate programs or professional programs. I'm not sure if it applies to graduate one, but professional programs, and doesn't apply to international students. The international student fees price, tuition has been going up. And now at some universities in Nova Scotia exceeds some comparable costs in the US for international students. And that used to be one of the ways we were able to, and I don't know what the price should be for an international student. I have no idea, but I know that one of the things that the universities were trying to do to get additional revenue was to bring in more international students as the cohort for local students goes down. They also pay more, they pay a higher maybe percentage of the cost of their education, which is obviously a benefit to the university. But one of the things that was a great marketing tool for students from Saudi Arabia or from England or wherever the case may be is that, or even from the States. I went to a lot of kids from the States at Dal and King's who came here because it was cheaper than going to the States, and now there's a much closer relationship between some of the programs and the international fees. So I'm just concerned that we're getting into a self-defeating situation where we're trying to address an issue, which is a real issue, and I recognize you're trying to address it, but the effect of that is actually going to put more pressure on other areas, whether it's deferred maintenance or the revenue from students or whatever the case may be.
I appreciate that you're identifying how complex the issue is. I don't know if you saw the results from the MPHEC study yesterday, which showed that although there's been a decline in Nova Scotia students attending the universities, there's been a 150% increase in international students attending Nova Scotia universities. And in the Nova Scotia international students, and I'll let Ava respond to this, are looking for high quality education, and they're finding it in Nova Scotia, and that's reflected in the increases in the numbers that we're, and so in terms of price, if they can look at comparable prices and get a higher quality, that's why we'll be able to attract them.
I agree, and I did see those numbers, and I don't want to suggest that those numbers have dropped yet. But I've spoken to a number of the university presidents and executives who have indicated that they're concerned that we're close to that tipping point, because you're right. People will pay, maybe people will even pay a bit more to come to Dal versus somewhere else. And it depends on the program too, because different programs will compete in different places. So for an international student, maybe Dal Law competes with I really have no idea, like Harvard, for example, for the sake of argument. But I don't know what the competitors are in different degree programs, but many of them have commented that we will reach that tipping point at some point, because there's a certain point where you won't pay 50% more tuition, for example, if you can get a comparable degree at a reputable place, maybe even elsewhere in Canada. So I'm just, what I'm concerned about is, fine, we're trying to address the operating costs, and I think some of the things that are being done there make sense. And I do, you know, whether it's working together on registration or things like that, or looking at those, that makes sense. But you still have this massive deferred maintenance bill, and there's a certain point where, as, again, I'll use Dal because it's the biggest one, so it's easy to use the example. They've got to the point where it's cheaper to tear down some buildings and build new ones, because they're not in a renovatable, I'm not sure if that's a word, but if you can't renovate them at a certain point. And so I'm just wondering what the plan is to deal with that deferred maintenance amount, because that seems to be the big elephant in the room.
You can answer that, yeah.
Mr. Play?
I just wanted to speak to the first part of your question on the international students, because we are, through the higher education branch, developing an international student strategy to look at mechanisms that will maintain the quality experience for the international students studying in Nova Scotia. I think maybe that's where you were headed with the question. If we're charging them double tuition, let's make sure they have a quality experience when they come here, so that that when they go back home, that perpetuates itself. Or
maybe so they can stay, because we're also trying to do it. If we're working with the immigration strategy, maybe we should be also trying to get some of those people to stay in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Or make it easier for them to stay.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And you don't go into a country recruiting students with the idea that we don't promote that they'll stay as immigrants, but when they're here, if they meet people and they want to settle here and they have job opportunities here, then they will want to stay. I also wanted to mention that credential recognition is huge when recruiting international students, and a Canadian degree, whether it's from Nova Scotia or British Columbia, still has that cachet. So you had a question on your ultimate question went back to the deferred maintenance issue, and I can start that, Deputy, if you wanted me to, or did you want to tackle? I was just reading in All Nova Scotia about the fountains donation to the Dal Arts Centre, and I think that is a fairly typical announcement, in that their $10 million, I think it was $10 million award, went to arts programming on the condition that Dal renovate the Arts Centre. And quite often you'll find that the big donations and the alumni donations don't go towards addressing maintenance issues. They're more towards programming or a new building that they can have a name put on, as opposed to.
Yeah.
So there is a gap between operating the university and the funding.
But that's why I think it's an issue, because you can raise money to build a new building. As you point out, it's pretty hard to raise money to renovate.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I think you wanted to add something.
Mackenzie.
Sorry.
The other piece of that is that the nature of post-secondary education is changing to some extent. So what you're seeing is a number of professors that are providing their PowerPoint presentations online and using different type of spaces to gather students together so they can work in teams. So not everything is being delivered in a lecture hall mode anymore. So we may need actually the new types of spaces, or the moving towards away from massive lecture halls.
I don't know if we're moving away from that, because and I agree that some of the courses in the upper years are delivered in that way, but my first year biology class at Dal had 300 students in a lecture hall. Now they are in a lecture hall down the road in a new building that has significantly more students in it in first year biology. So the first year classes are still, 300, 400, 500 kids, and that's okay, young people. I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, but we probably need both of those types of spaces. But it still means we have the deferred maintenance. So if you go walk through the Life Science Center, or I was over at St. Mary's the other day, and you walk through some of their buildings, they have buildings that, they're being held together with Band-Aids and duct tape, right? And And it's not unique. The province has done that, the federal government has done that, the municipalities have done that, where they've allowed deferred maintenance to build up, but it gets more expensive. So I guess it's good that there is some work being done on reducing operating costs for universities. I think that's good. I'm just wondering, we're still going to have that elephant in the room of $800 million, which grows every year and probably grows at not at a linear rate, probably grows more at an exponential rate to some extent.
So you're identifying a problem that has been the years and years and years in the making, and we are a year and a half into this memorandum of understanding, and we are dealing with what is a very complex set of issues and intertwined. So I want to provide you my assurance that we are looking at the issues of that are putting pressures on universities, and through looking at this is through a system approach. When the government put the memorandum of understanding, or entered into the memorandum of understanding, it was with the idea that collaboratively we will need to take on what are huge challenges in post-secondary education.
So when, you may not get time to answer this, I'm not sure, but if Economic and Rural Development or another department provides funding to a university for research purposes, which happens, or innovation work, which we see announcements on that sometimes, and I understand most of it's federal, often that is the same problem as the fountain donation, which is welcome, of course, but it's operating money that still requires a lab or requires a research facility or whatever else. Is that being looked at with other departments, that issue, that if they're going to give funding for an operational thing, that they talk about maybe whether they can provide capital funding at the same time?
Just so that you're aware, we do work with ERDT on any money that would be transferred under their research program. In addition, we transfer $15 million a year to do the support for research and development, which is used to exactly the type of work that you've just described.
Okay.
Order, please. Fortunately, Mr. Younger's time has expired. Mr. McMaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. The first thing I think about university education is the importance of optimizing the quality of the education with the affordability of it. And I know many of the offerings that government provides to universities, they seem to encourage inflation of tuition. There's tuition subsidies, which I guess mask the true cost of the tuition for the student. There's debt forgiveness, we have that now. My question would be, recognizing that all those, and those are good things because they try to keep the cost down for students, but they may be contributing to inflated prices of tuition because they're masking the true cost for the student. And we know that students are paying more and more every year. What requirements around affordability do we ask from the universities when we give them the tuition subsidies?
Ms. Sopley.
We don't give universities tuition subsidies.
So we offer Nova Scotia students a bursary, and the bursary is $1,283 per student, and it's automatically deducted from their tuition. And so as a parent of a university student, I have to say I just saw the bottom line. I didn't see the bursary amount, but I would have liked to have seen the bursary amount. I knew of it up front. But the government has a commitment to keep Nova Scotia tuition for Nova Scotian students at or below the national average. It's just below the national average for Nova Scotian students this year. I think it's something like $30 below. So the reality is that Nova Scotian students are finding their undergraduate tuition to be what they would find in other provinces generally. It's affordable. There are a number of various initiatives. The government's put a lot of money in the student assistance program. So rather than get involved with masking tuition or anything like that, it's taken a different perspective, which is to enhance the student assistance program quite significantly over the last few years. More than $100 million has gone into enhancing it, so that students can actually access university education. So
I guess that's my point, though. The government is pouring all the money in, but there's no requirement for the university itself to keep the tuition down. The reason tuition amounts are being kept down is because government is pouring more and more money in every year.
3% cap.
we've capped the tuition at 3% in the current MOU.
Now, is that, so there's a requirement that the universities can't raise it above 3% per year?
They can't. The only exceptions are the professional schools, medicine, dentistry, and law.
Do you work with the universities to look inside their cost structures to see how it could be made even lower than that?
That's what we're doing under the
Yeah, I mean, we have the memorandum of understanding in place that has a number of aspects to it, including working with universities to look at funding formula. We're doing a tuition review next year. We engage with the students to find out what their pressing concerns and perspectives are. So we are working with the stakeholders to first of all, get their perspective on where the pressures are within the system, and secondly, work to identify solutions that are affordable to Nova Scotians.
Okay. I think if you look at, it's like the old 80-20 rule. A lot of things can be broken down into 80-20. I think for universities, 80% of their cost is salaries for faculty. What is the solution to making that side of their business model more efficient or streamlined?
Okay.
Ms. McKenzie?
No, Ava's going to take that.
Ms. O'Play?
It's true that a large part of the operating costs are salaries. It's like that in any business, I would guess. It's in the range between 70 and 80%. The universities have certainly flagged that over the years, and you have different organizations within the universities flagging salaries as a concern. Part of the issue is that in order to maintain the quality that Mr. Younger flagged, you need to attract quality people. And so that's the challenge, is maintaining that balance and offering a quality education and a quality experience to the students, but also managing the costs. So certainly looking at salaries and how, retirement packages and all of that is something that the universities are doing right now. How government can help, we're talking with the university presidents about that, but they have to come forward with a plan in terms of how they propose to manage those costs, and then we're standing by ready to respond. Deputy, did you?
Ms. McKenzie?
In addition, the government moved last year to address pension pressures with the universities, which I believe relieved the universities of about $70 million worth of pressures. So these are the types of things that we're working with the universities to, as creatively as possible, to address what are big, complicated, and entwined problems.
Yes, yeah. And that would be, I think you're referring to the change from solvency going from 10 years to 15 years for their pensions.
They were exempt.
I think that was the...
They were, actually, they were exempt from...
They're exempt from that rule?
Yep.
Okay. And I know it does help for their cash flow because they're not required to put that money in, but the liability remains for the pension plan. But certainly, you're right that it does help their cash flow. I won't get into pensions today. But my next question is, how many professors would be on the pay list but not actually lecturing? Is that something you would keep information on?
I wouldn't have that information today.
No. Is it something the department keeps record of?
We're working with the universities to better understand how they're using faculty at each of the universities. One of the things, the conversations that we've been having, for instance, is that there's more use of part-time faculty in an urban area than there would be in the rural universities, and that causes different pressures in terms of the faculty and the staffing and their ability to move more expensive staffing and the things that are available to the urban universities to use. So that has been the conversation, but we haven't asked for those that type of reporting.
So it's possible that there could be faculty on the payroll that aren't actually teaching, that are, I guess, the universities are benefiting from the subsidy government's providing, but the students aren't benefiting from having somebody who's being paid for actually teaching them.
Ms. O'Play?
I was just mentioning to the deputy, that's part of their individual collective agreements that are negotiated at each institution separately from government's involvement.
Okay. My next question, are universities starting to focus on one main discipline and trying to specialize in that faculty?
Ms. McKenzie?
a significant part of the conversation that we've had is what does a differentiated system look like in Nova Scotia? And how can we benefit from each of the universities defining what their areas of differentiation or specialty is. And that has been a robust and a healthy conversation.
Okay. Next question. I've heard this about some of the universities. You'll probably know which one I'm speaking about, but I know that it is important for universities to do research work. But there's been a comment that sometimes there's too much focus on research. And what I mean by that is that there's a real interest to garner the prestige of research work over educating students. And how does this play out? Well, we see universities choose students who are more research focused. And as a result, we end up putting resources towards educating students that might not stay in Nova Scotia, but might be very capable students and do well in earning the university research grants, but only to leave our province when we might have other students who want to stay and make careers here. And I think of people who are studying in medical school for that. So instead of educating more Nova Scotian students to become doctors who are likely to stay in our province, we may be putting the resources towards somebody who's doing research work, which generates prestige for the university, but then that student leaves the province and maybe they go to Ontario or somewhere to do more research work, which is helpful, certainly. But if we're trying to get doctors in rural Nova Scotia, I wonder if we're trying to align our goals. We have an interest as government to make sure that we're educating people, especially when it comes to doctors, to choose people who will actually stay in our province because we are helping to subsidize their education. Can you comment on that?
So can I start with
Ms. Sopley or
I think the
Ms.
deputy-
McKenzie? Okay.
I'm just going to start. I'm going to pass it over to Ava. So there is a conversation underway currently with the universities talking about universities don't just live within the province that houses them. They have to be nationally competitive. They have to be internationally competitive. Yet the taxpayers that support the universities need to see the benefit back to from their investment. So the theme that we're working with the universities is internationally competitive, but locally connected. So they need to understand what our workforce requirements are, including doctors, but everything from what the IT companies that are starting up require through to the whole 9 yards in terms of the emerging sectors and our traditional sectors. So this is a conversation that we've been having with them, and Ava can speak specifically to the questions you had about faculty.
Ms. Sopley?
So both the deputy and I have the benefit of having worked in economic development as well as in the education field. And you'll be aware as well that most small medium enterprises in Nova Scotia have fewer than 10 employees. They're the cornerstone of our economy, but it also doesn't mean that a lot of research is going on in a small company of that size. The universities are the research engine for much more than just research itself. They're providing support to the economic sector through supporting companies, and the deputy has a single-minded focus, I would say, on encouraging the universities to be more supportive of industry and helping industry become more innovative through partnerships with the universities. So the business of the universities is twofold. Historically, it's twofold: to do research, to advance academic thought, and also to teach students, but to teach them in a way that encourages them to inquire and to do their own research. So we also have Nova Scotian students who don't want to be doctors, who want to be researchers, and to engage with the university on that level. And we were talking to the president of Dalhousie last night, and he said, we've lost some good researchers, but we've also attracted some good researchers. The nature of academics and research is that they're very mobile, and that they will travel both to Nova Scotia and from Nova Scotia. One of the things, when the deputy was talking about differentiation, we have some some very obvious strengths here in Nova Scotia, and we hope in the coming years to build those up so that we do become a centre that attracts researchers, for example, in the ocean studies and research field, and become renowned for that, and that perpetuates itself by attracting more students and so on. So the only way that we intend to really get involved in the research side of things within the university is to encourage the institutions to work in closer collaboration with local industry. And we see that, for example, at Acadia University, where they're working closely with the Wine Growers Association. We'd like to see more of that, where the local industry is supported by the university researchers.
Ms. McKenzie?
Just to follow on from Ava's comments, in addition, most of the research is done at Dalhousie. It's upwards of over 80%. And in the differentiation system that we're thinking about, a number of our universities are emerging as high-quality undergraduate teaching universities. So there is some research that's going on there, but their quality and the thing that they're selling themselves on is actually the teaching experience. So we do actually have, in the differentiated system, that kind of a balance emerging.
Okay. I know universities are great economic contributors, and I think of, especially in, well, I can think of St. FX where I went, in Antigonish, they certainly have the hospital there, the regional hospital, but the university is a huge part of that town and the county's economy, and it reaches out beyond the county. I do have some questions around efficiencies between universities. We do have a large number of universities relative to the student population. I do like the fact that we have different identities at the schools. I think that's a good thing. One of the things I think about, as much as universities are economic generators, if we have students leaving with too much debt, that is, there's an opportunity cost there. Those students, when they graduate, they don't have the disposable income to spend within our domestic economy. I know that's one of the biggest issues for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. I know power rates are important to them, but I also know the strength of the domestic economy is really a determinant of their success. So if we have a lot of young people coming out with a lot of debt, they're not able to buy things in the economy as freely as they would if they didn't have that debt. So I think there needs to be a balance there. My next set of questions involve, I guess, the other 20% side of the cost for universities, and that would be like overhead expenses and whatnot. And I know there's been some talk, how can we find ways for them to share expenses, given they're in our province, and maybe there's some efficiencies to be achieved there. Is there a solution to the high overhead expenses that we have at all of our universities in this province?
So I'm just going to start with the first part of your comments, and then I'm going to pass it over to Ava to talk about how we're using the Innovation Fund to deal with some of the energy costs and what have you. But in terms of student debt in Nova Scotia, this government has introduced a debt cap, which in effect, at the end of your undergraduate degree, means that you, oh, God bless you, only owe what is the portion of your Canada student loan left? The full Nova Scotia student loan is forgiven. So that is a significant contribution on behalf of the province. But in terms of the overhead costs, I'll turn that over to Ava.
Ms. Zoplay?
Thank you. So under the Excellence and Innovation Fund, a total of 34 projects have been approved to date through 2 rounds of program proposals and funding, and just have a breakdown from round 2 for you to give you a sense of the types of proposals that we received and approved. We received 7 proposals for education services. I mentioned shared library services. For instance, they're planning on having a central repository for their library system. There were 7 energy efficiency projects. One institution proposed changing to natural gas from using bunker sea oil to heat the campus. Some are more simple, looking at energy efficiencies in the buildings themselves. We also received some projects around facilities and IT sharing. So that 20%, even though it's a relatively small number, it does represent significant savings if the institutions can work together to take real costs out of the system. And we emphasize the permanent removal of costs. So we work with the institutions to ensure that they implement their projects appropriately. Some of them are still at the feasibility stage, but the ultimate goal is to take permanent costs completely out of the system, so that 20% you identified is reduced, in fact.
Okay, that's good. Just making me think when I hear more about the debt forgiveness, and I know there's obvious benefit for students. What is, have you ever done a calculation of the tuition subsidy and the average debt forgiveness per student? So I'm thinking if somebody goes to university for 4 years, they're going to get 4 years worth of tuition subsidy. They're also going to get, assuming they borrow, whatever the average amount that's borrowed, they're going to get a percentage of that forgiven. So that they have a max debt of, I think it's $25,000, you said. What is the average subsidy per student per year, given they're getting a subsidy for the tuition, and they're also getting debt forgiveness?
Ms. Sopley? Ms. Sopley?
That's probably a number that we could calculate for you. We haven't actually kind of bundled it all together, I don't think, but it's something that could be bundled together. We just do the math. But like I said, the Nova Scotian bursary for Nova Scotian students is $12.83 per student. And then around student assistance, we always emphasize eligible students, because not everyone qualifies for all of the student assistance programs. There's certain parameters in place.
Sure.
But if you wanted us to
I'd like to see the
attempt a
average.
calculation, we could try and get something together.
Because the debt forgiveness is certainly helpful for students, but it's almost it's really another addition to the tuition subsidy, because it's helping to pay for the cost of the university education. I'd just be curious to see what the total ultimate subsidy is per year per student for going to university, and relate that to the average cost for
Order,
tuition.
please. Unfortunately, Mr. McMaster's time has expired. Mr. Epstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our guests. Thank you. When the government changed in 2009, one of the initiatives was to set up a study of the universities. And of course, you'll know that the economist Tim O'Neill was asked to look extensively at the university system and advise the government. That resulted in a report in the autumn of 2010 called Report on the University System in Nova Scotia. This is a fairly extensive document, and I'm familiar with a predecessor document, at least one in Nova Scotia. I guess that was the one from the mid-1980s, where a Royal Commission chaired by Rod McLennan looked at the university system. So it's not a new exercise to look at our university system. And that McLennan report would have provided some background to what Tim O'Neill did. But I wonder about this in terms of the extent to which it is providing guidance for the department. Is it fair to say that Dr. O'Neill's report is the foundational document for the policies that the department is pursuing?
Ms. McKenzie.
I believe that there are significant elements of Dr. O'Neill's report that have been taken under advisement, but in some cases, Dr. O'Neill's assessments of what might happen to some of the universities actually haven't borne out. So it is a report that we pay attention to amongst a number of reports that we're paying attention to.
He seemed somewhat skeptical about enrollment prospects at some of the universities. Is that what you have in mind in terms of points that perhaps have not been borne out? Was there something else?
Ms. Sopley. By the way, you don't have to touch your mic. It's automatic.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I think the deputy was referring, in the O'Neill report, I believe he mentioned that Mount St. Vincent might ultimately look at amalgamation. And in the last few years, we've seen Mount St. Vincent as being a very well-run university. It doesn't have the debt concerns that some of the others have. But on the internet, you were right, on the international enrollments, I believe Dr. O'Neill pinpointed that they may decline, and in fact, the MPHEC report this week indicated that in fact, they've gone up quite substantially.
Yeah. In fact, I think the MPHEC report suggested overall that the total enrollments have gone up. Is that really the burden of what they said?
The enrollment for Nova Scotia went up 1.9% overall, but international students went up 15%, more than 15%.
Sure. The domestic source of students would have declined due to general demographics, but that the university system as a whole has made advances primarily because of the international student component. That's really what's being said. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned the Mount because I have to say that was a very striking observation in Dr. O'Neill's report from 2010. It seemed to suggest that there might not be a useful future for the Mount as an independent entity. Can you bring me up to date, Deputy, about this, about the current state of play with respect to the Mount from the perspective of the department?
From the perspective of the department, the Mount is a very well run university, and that would be one of the areas of the O'Neill report that actually hasn't borne out. So I would say that overall, if we were to take Dr. O'Neill's report, the key that we have to pay attention to is that our current system is not sustainable. And that's the premise of which we entered into a memorandum of understanding. Whether or not he was correct or not on the individual pieces, and I would say that on Mount St. Vincent University, they are a very well-run university, and they are competitive with other well-run universities in Canada.
Can you actually explain to me what you mean by that? That is, that the current system is not sustainable? We've done an estimation that even with, and this is, I'm speculating on these numbers, but even if we were to maintain a 3% tuition cap, which would still be increases to universities, even if there started to be a 2% addition into the university system into the out years, even with those two, which would be above, potentially growth that we could expect, that would result still in about $100 million gap. So there is a structural gap between what the universities are bringing in as revenue and what they project their expenditures are into the future. So that is the conversation that we're having in terms of the structural nature of the issue and what we can do to address it. Are you saying that the department has a view as to the appropriate proportion of university revenue that ought to come from tuition, from research grants, and from the government? I wouldn't say that was what I was referring to. What I was referring to is if we were to even factor in potential growth of up to 5%, with 3% tuition and 2% government grant, there would still be a significant gap into the future, which comes from negotiated wage settlements, comes from a variety of different cost pressures into the future, and that is the effort that we're putting in to be able to say, what does a sustainable system look like in Nova Scotia, given that the current system fundamentally has that kind of an outlook? Yes, I'm not sure I understood the $100 million figure. Are you saying that that is an annual figure for the universities as a whole? And when would that be reached? In 3 years. Sorry? Sorry, in 3 to 4 years. 3 or 4 years from now? Yes. Okay. If we were to stay on the same trajectory, our intention is not to stay on the same trajectory. And does that figure take into account the effect of the change in the pension solvency rules? Yes, it does. So I believe it does, yes. Yep. And do you have any breakdown as to where that number comes from? That is what it's attributable to? We can provide that. Okay. A couple of times the word efficiencies has been used about the system, both in terms of past achievements and in terms of future potentials. And I'm wondering if you can help me first to understand past achievements of efficiencies inside the university system. So, for example, when there was a little talk earlier about the Excellence and Innovation Fund, I noticed that there was a passing reference to some money having been put into the library system, if I understood that point correctly. And yet it was my understanding that the university library systems had been integrated fairly thoroughly early on with something called NovaNet, in which there's sort of a kind of coordinated acquisition and borrowing policy and so on. And I wondered just, whether that would count as kind of an achieved efficiency from the past and where you saw it as weak, just to take that as an example.
Ms. Hoplay?
So we can get you additional details on the repository project, but essentially all the libraries in Nova Scotia are working together to look at ways where they can provide services more efficiently in general. So NovaNet's been in existence for years, maybe 25 years perhaps. But there are many other services, and in addition to that, just the storage of hard copy books is expensive, and they're looking at ways where they can be centrally stored and maintained as well. So the libraries provide a whole suite of services beyond just the lending of books that students enjoy. It goes to supporting faculty and researchers and a whole suite of activities. And so they're looking, the librarians themselves are leading this project and looking for ways where they can work together and become much more efficient.
Yes, so the university's worked out an efficient library system at least a couple of decades ago. I think you're right about the timing on that, although you're now saying it might need some tweaking. Is there not also common purchasing amongst the universities? I forget what it's called. It has a name. Do you happen to remember what it's called? It doesn't matter if you can't remember.
I know what you're referring to. It's it's a consortium that the university set up to purchase paper and materials.
Yes, which the universities worked out for themselves. So I guess what I'm wondering is what are the other kinds of efficiencies? I know on the academic side that the universities have long since worked out an agreement in which supervision of graduate students, for example, can take place with panels coming from different universities. That's something that's worked out to the convenience and better quality of the offerings, but the universities did this on their own a long time ago. I don't know if it has a dollar impact, but it certainly does make sense. I'm wondering what are the other efficiencies that you have in mind?
Well, I mentioned the energy efficiencies. So many of the universities undertook energy efficiency projects in the first round of the Excellence and Innovation Fund, and I also mentioned that those have become a bit more robust in the second round, and we can talk about future initiatives if you want. Projects that have just been approved?
Yes. No, I think energy efficiency makes a lot of sense, and I know a number of the universities have been working on this for some time. I'm sure the availability of the fund has been welcomed to try to facilitate that. What about the registrar's offices? Can you talk to us about the registrar's offices and how this works?
Sure, happy to. So I worked in the registrar's office at DAL for 10 years, and there are a number of efficiencies there that we're supporting. And now that you've said the word, I'm going to keep repeating it probably. But one is on collaborative student recruitment. So the universities themselves have robust international recruitment strategies. They also have national and local recruitment strategies. And one of the aspects of recruiting students is to sell Nova Scotia as a study destination. So where they can collaborate and do that, there's some efficiencies there. So we've supported a project that they brought forward to help them do that. We also announced the Common Application Portal, and people immediately think about the Ontario application portal, that's one portal that exists in Canada. There are some others, and what we are doing with the registrar's offices we're working with them actively to identify a Made in Nova Scotia solution that's affordable to Nova Scotian students when they're applying to universities, and also delivers a better and faster service to the students.
Just before we leave that, can you just tell us what the current state of play is for the Common Application Portal?
It's really in its infancy stages. It was just announced the end of March, so we're just getting started, but Dalhousie is the host for the project. We have a full-time project manager dedicated to developing it, and we are looking at other systems, both in Canada and elsewhere, to see how those were set up, what are the pros and cons, what are the lessons learned, and to move forward to have a system in place in 2 years for students in grade 10 when they apply to university.
Right. The essence is that students wouldn't have to fill in multiple application forms for, even if they're interested in the possibility of going to several different universities, they could just do it once, and something would happen to help them through the system automatically, or with some facility. Is that right?
That's correct. And the real asset is the electronic transcript from high schools in Nova Scotia to the universities.
Right. So it'll make it simpler, presumably less expensive and less time consuming.
Less errors in data entry and
sure.
faster.
Yes. Okay. What about transfer of credits? That's one of the other things that registrars' offices commonly do. How is that being dealt with now?
So linked to the application portal is a transfer credit portal, and we're starting with summer school courses, but we plan to expand it. The interesting aspect of this, and this is, I think, for the first time, is that NSCC will be included in the portal. So the idea is that when a student is transferring from any university in Nova Scotia to another Nova Scotia university, they could type in Biology 1000, for instance, and it would show the equivalent at the other institution in terms of what they would get. But also an NSCC student could type in whatever their courses were, and it would show the credit that they would be awarded for that course.
So the universities are talking about a system of acceptability of credits for transfer amongst themselves for degree credit. Is that right?
Yeah. And to make it, the number one priority is to make it transparent to the students up front, so they know what transfer credits they'll be getting. But once we address the transparency issue, we hope to make it just more commonly accepted that the courses across the system in years 1 and 2 are generally accepted and for credit.
Yes. The linkage to the community college system in this respect is very important. I'm wondering if I could hear more about the way in which the department envisages the evolution of linkages between the universities and the community colleges.
You want me to do this? Well, just having university-age children myself, students these days really like the a la carte approach. They want to take a bit from here and a bit from there and a bit from over there and have it all come together in terms of a customized degree. And so ultimately, I think employers would welcome that as well. We'd like to make it very easy for students to take courses at the community college, take courses at a university, and also take courses online, so that they have a degree that makes sense to them and makes sense to employers. So we want to make it easier for students to move amongst institutions, both virtually and in person, and to piece together a program and a degree that makes sense. So we're doing that through the application portal. We're going to include NSCC in that as well, and then through the transfer credit portal, making it easier for students to see that their credits from NSCC to the university and vice versa will transfer.
Ms. McKenzie.
Additional work that is being done, I think that's important to note, is that one of the things that we think is the most important thing that we can do is make sure that young people are choosing programming in an informed way, so that they're entering university or entering the community college with good information in terms of what the career opportunities are. So in addition to the work that we're doing with the universities, we also have the government has approved a project that's looking at moving our employment centers towards acting more as career information centers for a broader group of people, which would include young people that are choosing to provide them with better career information. The objective there would be that, for instance, if you moved into the community college and took programming, that not only would you know what your career path would be, but you would also know how that would translate into articulation into other approved programming in the province. And if I can give you the example of my son's experience, he decided he wanted a business degree, thought he would be better in a teaching environment to begin, has entered the Nova Scotia Community College, will move through the business programming, know that he can exit then with a diploma that's recognized, and then can also move into St. Mary's University or Mount St. Vincent University to get a full commerce degree. So those are the types of things we want to provide more information to Nova Scotia students about.
And I'm not sure I heard the operative word at the beginning when you were describing it. You're saying you wanted to improve the system or move the system or move these advice centers? What was the term that you used for it?
What we would like to do is transition the centers from being employment centers that are currently providing advice to EI clients and IA clients into full-blown career centers that provide information for all Nova Scotians.
Does that mean a physical location somewhere different than where they are now, or is it mostly online?
We actually have 66 points of delivery. They tend, in Nova Scotia currently, but they tend to have a very limited clientele. What we're looking is doing is expanding the clientele that they're able to serve so that young people in high schools through to career changers through to people that are trying to explore what they'd like to do in the future would have a place that they could go get good career information and then are making good decisions to move into the community college and universities into the future. And then we're working to make sure that the programming is articulated so that you can move along the lines of what Ava described as an a la carte system.
Right. We actually arrived at our discussion of this when I was asking about transfer of credits. Can I just go back to ask what's the current state of play on that? I got the impression that all parties were willing to engage in this. How far along is the process?
Still play?
So on the transfer credit portal, it also is in its infancy. It's one of those projects that was just announced at the end of March, but Dalhousie is taking the lead on that project as well, and it's their intention to closely link it with the application portal. So I should say all of the universities have signed on to it, though.
Any idea what timetable you're looking at in terms of accomplishing this?
The initial phase of the transfer credit portal is to address summer school courses. So we should see by next January, February, a common portal for summer school courses that are offered in the May, June, July session, and then expanding from there.
In the context of the objective that was strongly flagged earlier of making universities more sustainable financially, I assume that this implies that there will either be one registrar's office or a reduction in the function of registrar's offices.
Unfortunately, Mr. Epstein, your time has expired. Mr. Younger, you have 17 minutes.
You can answer that question if you want, because I'm interested actually knowing the answer. So,
Ms. Opley.
That's not part of the project, is to look at those efficiencies in the actual registrar's office. It's mostly about making sure that Nova Scotian students stay in Nova Scotia. We make it very easy for them to remain in the province and to not only apply and receive their acceptance very quickly, but also to have the ability to move their transcripts electronically from their high school to the university.
would that be like the Ontario, I assume Ontario still does this, where they have, the Ontario universities used to have one portal for registration, class selection, and all that sort of thing?
They have a portal for admissions.
Yeah.
Yeah, not for individual class
Not for
registration.
individual classes,
Yeah.
okay. I never went to university in Ontario, so I haven't experienced it. Do you track how many students are leaving Nova Scotia to go to other provinces? I mean, obviously, some always will, but do you track that at all?
We do have those numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head,
Okay.
but we pay attention to the number that go to Newfoundland, for example.
Yeah, though actually, it's one of the places I was thinking about is Newfoundland or Quebec or
Yeah.
things like that. So I know you said you don't have them here, but it's possible to get those then?
Yeah, we can share those with you. The MPHEC noted that our Nova Scotians attending Nova Scotia universities declined, but our overall undergrad enrollment went up by 1.9%
Okay.
this year.
I'll get the chair to add that to the list of things he's got there. Mr. Epstein talked about mergers and affiliations to some extent. He touched on it when he was talking about the Mount issue, and I know that one fell off the radar. But there was also talk about, well, obviously the Nova Scotia Agriculture College became a school of Dalhousie. There was some talk about King's, although they already have such an affiliation with Dal. can't see how they would have any savings by just changing the name. And obviously, the big one that seems to circle is the NASCAD DAL one, which obviously has some potential issues, I would think, because NASCAD has an international branding around its name and its history as an independent art school, and a very important one at that. Can you tell me, has there been any further discussion around mergers, or maybe not even, sometimes mergers are a bad word, but affiliations and things like that?
Ms. McKenzie?
I'm going to turn it over to Dave and then come back on.
Okay. Ms. Delplay?
So we're actually meeting this afternoon with NASCAD. The province supported 2 studies for NASCAD to undertake. One was to look at affiliation with either Dalhousie or St. Mary's. And a lot of the upfront work that was done on that study was to clarify that what we're talking about is in fact affiliation and not a merger. You mentioned the University of King's College example with Dalhousie, and we do see that as a very positive example of an affiliation that's worked really well. Both institutions maintain separate identities, but King's has the benefit of using many of the Dal services.
So if you went in that direction, that would be more, and I know it's just discussions at the moment, but that would be more the model you would be looking at, is like if, for the public, if they think about the King's Dal model, that would be more what is being considered.
Affiliation is the model that we have under consideration, and both Dalhousie and St. Mary's are quite interested in the interesting and unique programming that could emerge from closer affiliation with NASCAD for different reasons. So the other study that I wanted to mention that we've supported is a space utilization study, and that's looking at does NASCAD need all the space that it currently has at 3 campuses, and is there a way to use that more efficiently? What is, in fact, the amount of space that NASCAD actually needs to offer the programs that it offers?
Can I just...
Yeah, sure.
Ms. McKenzie?
Just 2 quick things. One is that the Premier has been unequivocal that there is every intention of this government to support and continue to support a vibrant fine arts university at Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. Secondly, the affiliation study is being led by Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. It's not being led by the departments, just so that I thought that perhaps you said what was your intention. I just want to be clear that the college has led the affiliation study and has contracted the...
Yeah, no, I appreciate that clarification. I think the province has the checkbook, so I assume you get some say in what happens as well. But either way, I mean, I agree. It's something I agree with the Premier on. I think that we need to make NASCAD a school within another university. It just wouldn't make sense. The affiliation, I think, could make some sense. It obviously depends on how it's modeled. I think it's the same thing that applies at King's, where King's has a brand that is around this unique small school, but they have obviously a very strong affiliation. Is there any consideration around, you said they're talking to St. Mary's and Dal. Dal obviously has a larger graduate program and graduate offerings, and NASCAD offers a mix of graduate and undergraduate degree programs. St. Mary's obviously has some, but they're primarily an undergraduate school. Is there any discussion around the pros and cons of, if they are going to affiliate, which is the better model in terms of the course offerings and the program offerings?
Ms. Delplay?
So that's going to be part of the discussion once the affiliation report is submitted. We haven't had discussions about that, but I can say that there already is some collaboration among researchers between NASCAD and Dal and NASCAD and
especially through the
St.
architecture
Mary's.
school.
Architecture, urban planning, even occupational therapy.
All right.
So some really interesting joint research.
Is there a point where a university gets too big? So, and I think of Dal and their managing fine, but they've taken on the agriculture college, which is obviously, I mean, I think everybody would say, yeah, there's connections with the sciences and engineering and all that. So, I mean, obviously it makes sense. I mean, you can make a case for almost anything, but is there a point where a university becomes too big?
You want me to?
You have to ask Newfoundland.
Yeah, I mean, I was head of admissions at Dal for 10 years and in charge of recruiting for Dal and traveled the world and
That's where I know the name. All right.
not from the admissions side.
No, you were there when I was there.
Okay.
So.
It just, on a world scale, Dal's so small, it's unbelievable.
No, I
so
recognize that. I'm thinking, but in terms of everything here is smaller, right? So our Department of Education is smaller than it is in other places too. And I'm just wondering, is there a point where it just, the cost, like, because we're talking about efficiencies, right? And where do you save operating costs? And the interesting thing, if you look at the fountain donation, one of the things that it came in advance of that was a vote of the theater department and the music department to merge and form the School of Performing Arts. So on the one hand, they'll have costs, and on the other hand, they might actually achieve some operational efficiencies, at least on the administrative side. But I'm just wondering, like, all of a sudden now they have to manage a campus that's in Truro. They picked up tons, like when I went to Dal, it was tons, and then it became, and they were independent, then it became Daltech, and then it became the Dalhousie School of Engineering. There was Henson College, which now is the Dalhousie School of Continuing Education, I think. But I'm just wondering, at what point is there a point that anybody's concerned that you lose the efficiencies because you're managing, like, for example, if, I know they're not going to take NASCAD as a school, but if they were to take on other things like that, is there a point where they become too large that you lose those efficiencies?
maintain the 10. Our objective is to maintain 10 distinct universities in Nova Scotia. I guess ultimately what I was thinking as you were asking that is that students will be the judge. Dalhousie has to continue to offer a quality experience to those students, and it has to review its own internal operations on a regular basis to ensure it does that. I wanted to say that every opportunity for closer affiliation has to be considered on its own merits, and so we're looking at the affiliation opportunity between Dal and NASCAD, or NASCAD and St. Mary's, just on their own merits and what that affiliation can bring.
Okay. Sort of changing, well, it's related, I guess. The last budget that just went through the legislature, or I guess technically in the previous budget, had a prepayment to Acadia and to NASCAD. And that was discussed in the legislature, so we know the reasons why. There is no prepayment allowed for, or budgeted for at this point, according to the minister anyways, for this year to either of those two universities. But what I want to understand is that the answer from the minister at the time as to why those prepayments were done was because of the cash flow cycle for those universities. So I understand that makes sense. So they need, Acadia manages their cash flow, so they need a check in February or March 1st or whatever the date was. And they can't wait until April 30th. But that would strike me as being an annual issue for them unless they are going to change. Now, NASCAD's may have been slightly different, so I'm thinking Acadia. If their cash flow issue and their management is that way on an annual basis and nobody has said to them, by the way, we need you to change by next year, then that strikes me that they're going to be coming in February and asking for their prepayment again, which the minister said is not in the budget. So I'm just trying to understand, has anybody had a conversation with them to talk about?
Mr. McKenzie?
I talk to the universities weekly. And
Oh, yeah, I'm sure you do. I meant on this issue. I'm sorry.
and we are in conversation on a regular basis about their finances and that type of a thing. So I'm not pre-anticipating what the end of the year will look like. We're working through.
But you understand
I
my
understand
concern is that the answer the minister gave, which was a perfectly reasonable answer, and from my perspective, was that, well, listen, they need the cash every February, but then it raised the second question, I think at the end of February, beginning of March, whatever it was. But then that raised the next question, which was, well, yes, but you haven't put it. But then she went on to say that, well, they hadn't budgeted for it in, I guess it was he now, sorry. But they hadn't budgeted for it in this year, so that presupposes that they will change their budgeting process this year or their cash flow process.
I guess all I can say is that we're continuing to work with the universities. It's the objective of the Memorandum of Understanding to work towards sustainability, and NASCAD actually is working its way through reducing what that deficit is, and they're on target.
Okay. Yeah, and NASCAD, I think, is probably in a slightly different situation because they've sort of been the focus. And I understand earlier you were saying that Acadia is one of the ones that has the debt issue, but at this point, you're still trying to work towards trying to shift things for them. Okay. Have you, so the cap on tuitions at 3%, which matched the cut, only applied to undergraduate programs, is that correct? Undergraduate programs for domestic students, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. So have you tracked the increases over those years in professional programs or graduate programs or any of those? Because I know some of those increased. Some of them may have been less than 3, but some of them increased by more than 3%.
Ms. Sopley?
We have those numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head.
We can get those.
We can get those.
All right, that's fine. We had written a letter, which I can table, I'm sure you've seen it, on April 30th regarding NASCAD funding, and this gets back to this affiliation issue and the concern that they had expressed to our caucus about a pressure on them to merge. So I just want to clarify, because we haven't received a response to that letter that we had written on behalf of NASCAD, but can I take it from your response earlier that there is no interest in seeing them merge with anybody?
There's never been any discussion.
Yeah, I saw your letter the other day.
Oh.
The response to your letter is en route. I think you asked 12 questions or so.
Yeah, it might have been.
Quite a few questions.
I didn't write the letter, so.
Anyway, all the questions have been diligently responded to, and you should receive those answers shortly. But we emphasized in the letter that what we're discussing is affiliation and not merger.
Okay, but thank you, I appreciate that. I'll look further. I'll table it just in case anybody else wants to see it. But I'd like to talk, how long do I have left?
You have 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. I just want to talk very briefly about research, since my colleague from Inverness had raised that issue. So one of the issues that I've noticed over the years, so many of the universities have an office of commercialization, which makes a lot of sense, because obviously there's no point in inventing something or coming up with something if you don't then commercialize it. One of the problems we've had is having Nova Scotia companies do the commercialization, and often it's gone to the States, which means the economic benefit from that research doesn't result here. I mean, obviously there's a benefit because there's money going into the university and research, but it hasn't turned into economic opportunity and jobs and companies moving ahead here. Is there anything being done to try and work with Nova Scotia companies or companies with Nova Scotia offices so that the benefits of those patents and that can be felt here in Nova Scotia?
So we have a two-pronged response for you. One deals with personnel, because you touched on a really important issue that a lot of our intellectual capital goes south. And one of the things that we've done is partnered with MITACS. The acronym is MITACS. It doesn't actually mean anything anymore. Initially, it was a mathematical association across Canada, but it funds promising graduate students and postdoctoral students to work with industry to commercialize research in Canada. And MITACS was telling me that when they started the organization, it was started by a professor at UBC, but it's now a national organization. The federal government supports it quite heavily. 70% of PhD students were graduating and going to work in industry in the United States and commercialize research there. Now that number's reversed. They're staying here. And Nova Scotia has supported our postdoctoral fellows to work with industry here. Most recently, we've supported MITACS with a $200,000 grant that will fund 2 postdoctoral students to do their research here in Nova Scotia with industry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Sorry, the deputy wants to add to that, but I just wanted to touch on it's so important to try and keep our highly qualified researchers here in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, it's not just the people. I mean, I'm thinking the value that we get out of the patents that are created and so forth.
And I think the deputy's going to handle that part.
Ms. McKenzie, you only have about 20 seconds.
Okay. The productivity innovation vouchers, I would encourage you to take a look at them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McMaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just following up, we were talking before about, on the cost side, 80% is faculty for most universities, 80% of their costs, roughly. Have we ever looked at increasing the number of teachable hours in the classroom? And I'll just present a scenario for you. And it might seem a bit extreme at first, so I'll ramp it back down to something maybe more reasonable. But right now, I believe a full course load is 3 courses the first half of the year and 2 courses the second half of the year. So that's a total of about 15 hours of teaching. Now, I know they're doing all kinds of other activities, preparing for classroom activity and, of course, marking of exams and papers and whatnot. But if you increased that to 4 full courses first half of the year, 4 full courses second half of the year, you'd have an increase of 60% productivity. You'd have a 40% savings on 80% of your costs, which would lead to a 32% savings in tuition, which is quite significant. Supposing that was too extreme and you wanted to go with just a quarter of that improvement, you'd have an 8% cost savings. Do you ever look at things, specific examples like that, and talk to the universities about maybe asking for an increase in productivity to get a resultant savings in tuition? Because I know if students knew next year they were going to get an 8% tuition reduction, they'd be pretty happy. And so would their parents. I'll let you comment.
Yeah.
Ms. Sopley.
So a couple points to respond to your question. A couple weeks ago, we brought in some guest speakers to speak to the university presidents about the future of post-secondary education, both in Canada and globally. One representative was from the Education Advisory Board in Washington, D.C., and the other was from the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario. Both very experienced and brought in all over the world to comment on what's happening in higher education. And so at a very high level, definitely efficiencies within the system were discussed, and the points that you raised of how to structure faculty's engagement with students and also with research was raised. But we haven't gotten into the details of that kind of consideration here in Nova Scotia. Yeah. Yeah, it's really, the second part is that it's really subject to the collective agreements of the individual institutions, and so the government has not waded into that part at all.
Sure, sure. And I know one of the other points that would come back is, you know, if you had that happening in one province and not other places, you might end up losing some of your talent at the universities. But I also think that could even itself out, because if we know there's people that go to Newfoundland now because apparently Memorial is quite a bit cheaper to go to school there. So I think the economics of it might settle that out and even that out over time, so that wouldn't be so much of an issue. But I thought I would raise the point, and it's good to hear that you're talking about it anyway. And I think we have to keep open minds. If, what did they say, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. And we often hear about from students about how expensive university is and how they would like it to be more affordable. So if we're going to try to make it more affordable, I think it makes sense that we start to actually look at ideas that make a concrete difference in making it affordable. So that's why I raise it. When I was in the first round, I was asking some questions about the other 20% costs, mostly the shared services ideas and ways you had mentioned you look to try to reduce costs that are permanent reductions in cost. You had mentioned IT sharing. You had mentioned universities moving to natural gas because it's a cheaper source of energy than Nova Scotia Power right now. Are there other shared service programs that universities are looking at to find ways to save costs there?
And the library as well, we highlighted. So, and the application portal, the transfer credit portal, sort of back office types of operations. They're also looking at shared services and equipment. So for example, NASCAD put forward a proposal that was supported to partner with Dal, St. Mary's, and the Mount to develop a rapid prototyping facility where they can use 3D printers and other equipment to offer support to both researchers within the university system, but also in industry. So we saw some creative thinking come forward that we welcomed. So some of the projects perhaps weren't as innovative as you might want, but you have to start somewhere. And I preferred actually some of these proposals. They started at a very practical level, so we could see that they were heading in the right direction, that take costs out of the system, perhaps generate some revenue, and combine operations with other institutions to offer quality service.
That's good. Well, practical is good.
Yeah.
Usually it means results, so
That's
good.
what we're hoping.
Yeah.
Ms. McKenzie?
So I just wanted to add, I do think that it's important that we look at the practical, and I do think it's important that we look at, there's been conversations around rinks, how we can, share in that case, and there's been conversations with respect to the new U4 that's just been announced, where Acadia and St. FX will work with other universities in terms of marketing and those types of things. And I didn't get a chance to read the carefully prepared speech that had been done for me, but I just would like to bring one thing to the fore. Our competition is not Newfoundland. There's Newfoundland students are actually coming to Nova Scotia. Students choose to go where they want to be educated. What is really interesting, and I think I'd like to just to flag, is that the Times, which is an international education metric for post-secondary education, has just had 2 Chinese universities move on to the top 100. And there's a university or a community college being built in China every month. And there is the intention to have an enrollment of 40 million students there by 2020. That will be attracting faculty out of our systems and into universities internationally. So when we sit down and have conversations about where we're going with post-secondary education, that's the landscape that we're trying to have the conversation in. It's not really Atlantic Canada or how we're competitive with those types of things, but how can this post-secondary education system come together and not, it's wonderful that we're having conversations around portals and electronic transcripts and those types of things, and many of the countries would expect these would be, this is something we have to do. But that we also need to be looking at how can we be, our 10 universities, be competitive into an international landscape that is changing dramatically. And that is everything from how we're going to be, people are creatively, I'm reading every day in terms of what people are doing with in terms of faculty in the States, what does tenure look like into the future, those types of things, which are, they're creative, they're being led by faculty in terms of what those discussions look like. And it's partly we need to get the nuts and bolts organized of our universities, but we also need to get our heads up and look at how does our system fare in an international setting, and what can we do to make sure that we're as competitive as we possibly can be and provide high quality education to students that will come to pay for the quality. And so I just want to make sure that we're thinking about that in that context as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate your comments. And actually, that doesn't scare me, and I don't see the quality of education going down. Maybe I'm not, I don't have the expertise to make that statement, but, and I don't think maybe that's necessarily what you're saying, but I think it's actually an opportunity. If there are people that leave Nova Scotia to go to China, there's plenty of smart people to step in their positions in Nova Scotia universities. Hopefully we're building an economy here with lower taxes and less wasteful spending and whatnot to encourage people to want to stay in the province. And of course, we obviously have many things that we enjoy about the province, is what keeps us here to begin with. But I guess if there's one thing that's constant, it's change. So, and the universities are experiencing that, just like everybody else. Have universities looked at combining some programming? Is that something that's discussed?
So play.
Well, they historically have. What sprang to mind is international development studies and women's studies, Dallas, St. Mary's, and the Mount. shared some of those programs. I think where it makes sense to do that, the universities are absolutely open to that and have had those ongoing discussions. With the transfer credit portal project, where we're starting off with the summer school initiative, one of the aspects of that is to not duplicate summer school offerings, so unless geographically it makes sense. So for example, the idea is that if they're offering an intro economics course in Metro Halifax through a summer school program, that Dalles, St. Mary's, and the Mount won't all offer it, that there'll be some discussion about who's going to offer what. So that kind of collaboration is definitely happening.
You mentioned a couple of courses there where it sort of made sense to do that. Can you give a little more background on why it's worked well for those courses?
Just from my own, I can use my own example. Sure. Where I did a Bachelor of Education in English and Social Studies and took courses at Dalles, the Mount, and St. Mary's. And what you do, you end up getting the best of all worlds. It was not an issue at all for me to make my way to any of those 3 universities in the course of my studies. And if it meant getting an excellent professor with all the supports and background that I wanted, it didn't matter that I go 10 minutes out of my way to get that. So I think that students have found that, and that goes back to my original kind of a la carte comment, that if we can collectively enable students to put together programming that meets their needs and their interests by utilizing what we see as a huge pool of opportunity in Nova Scotia, but especially in the metro area with all the offerings that we have, they should be able to do that.
Sure. And it certainly works in metro here because you have universities that are physically close together and that. Have you seen examples of them combining courses with universities that are further apart? Maybe, I don't know, distance learning. I don't know if that's as effective, but...
You could, well, like Acadia and the Mount, for instance, I know through their education program, they often have students going back and forth. But CBU is talking to Dalles, for instance, on how they can collaborate. So the deputy just mentioned they have a memorandum of understanding between Dalles and CBU to collaborate on some course programming.
Okay. Switching gears here a little bit. Within the Department of Labour and Advanced Education, how much collaboration happens between Labour and Advanced Education?
Ms. McKenzie?
A great deal. Is there something specific that you're wondering around?
Are there any programs that you work together on? Can you give us a little background on that, if there are?
So, when you're speaking about labor, you're talking about the occupational health and safety, the technical safety, and the labor standards?
I think I'm thinking maybe broader than that even. Like anything that's happening in the labor side of the department.
It's like the workforce development side? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So you may want to speak to that, but we have regular meetings where we're looking at actually putting a plan together. We have the workforce strategy, which identifies, and the government has put forward, which supports jobs here. Within the workforce strategy, we have 3 primary areas that we're looking at. One looks at how can we do education and training in the workplace. So that is often provided by the Nova Scotia Community College, but into the future could be provided by universities, particularly if it's around professional positions. The second is to grow the population from in terms of immigration, repatriation, and attraction in terms of people staying. And the other is around career and workforce attachment in terms of supporting people in the sectors, the growth sectors. And so obviously the post-secondary education system would be a big part of how we're going to be able to achieve those goals in the workforce strategy. So we have regular meetings and regular conversations, and Ava can speak to that.
Ms. Sopley?
So I work quite closely with the Nova Scotia Community College, and some interesting things are happening with NSCC. And I just wanted to mention a practical example where you'll recall the IBM announcement where they were opening a big data center here. Part of that announcement was that IBM also requires workers, and they require workers who have education and background in analytics. And so NSCC is leading a discussion with the universities 6 universities plus NSCC on how to prepare students in Nova Scotia to access these jobs and to graduate qualified and able to take these jobs. So I really like what I'm seeing in terms of industry and NSCC and the universities all engaging collectively to come up with solutions for Nova Scotians.
Ms. McKenzie?
Just one other quick point. The province supports the Nova Scotia School for Adult Learning, and within that, 4,500 adults are currently involved in upgrading annually. About 50% of those are less than 29 years of age, and 25% of them are less than 25 years of age. So those are the places where young people that may not have gotten the opportunity to finish high school are on-ramping into upgrading. They achieve their high school diploma, and they're able to access both the Nova Scotia Community College and the university from there. So that is a great example where our workforce side is working with our post-secondary side to make sure that Nova Scotians have opportunities.
Okay. I don't know if you'll know the answer to this question right off, but for university-educated students, are the number of jobs available to them increasing or decreasing within our Nova Scotia economy?
So this is an interesting point that you raised. So, last night, Ava and I both met with the student associations, and we talked about this very thing in terms of how young people are feeling, whether or not they have opportunities to attach. It's very interesting that Nova Scotia businesses, and in some ways the provincial government, have attached, it's not just a university degree, but we've attached additional requirements for years of experience, 2 to 4 years of experience, not uncommon in the private sector as well. And that is something that we need to seriously take a look at. If we were to say, let's aggressively attach as many young people as we can, we would look at whether or not you really need those 2 to 4 years experience, and whether or not it's not better to actually on-ramp them and provide the training. And we have other ways of supporting training in the businesses. So are there opportunities? There are, but they're going away to get the experience, and then we have to work to get them to come home. So
Order,
that is
please. Unfortunately,
Okay.
Mr. McMaster's time has expired. Mr. Upstein.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And before I ask some questions, I wondered if I might just pass some remarks with respect to some of the questioning from the member from Inverness. It had to do with the suggestion of increased course load for full-time faculty members. I have to say that my knowledge of this suggests to me very strongly that the full-time faculty members are appropriately loaded inside the universities with teaching responsibilities. And although, of course, you can always argue the toss in 1 or 2 individual cases, and the universities grapple with this as their administrations do, as any managers will, that's not the essence of what the universities have done, or really probably could do. What they have done, the universities, is in grappling with their funding problems, has been to turn increasingly to part-timers. It's now been very common for all universities, including, of course, in Nova Scotia, that courses are taught by part-timers, which is, in many institutions, a significant problem. And it's a problem because they're paid so little that the time they can put into teaching a course is something that perhaps doesn't afford the students as much depth as they probably deserve. I say this as a part-time faculty member myself. I have many years of experience of doing this, and I know that at many of our universities, unfortunately, a huge number of courses are now taught by part-timers, somewhat to the detriment of the overall quality of the institutions. I would now like to move to my questioning, though. When I was talking before with you about efficiencies that had been achieved inside the university system, one of the ones I had in mind as well was the existence of the MPHEC, the Maritime Provinces Higher Education Commission. This is also something that has been worked out many decades since, and is involved in the coordination of programs amongst the universities. I'm just wondering if you can give us a brief overview of what the MPHEC does.
This will test me in front of my boss. Thank you for that question. So the MPHEC, it does coordinate programming requests it doesn't necessarily make decisions on the request. Sometimes they're referred back to the provinces for the ultimate decision, but we do deal with a lot of programming issues. The essence there is to avoid duplication of new programs. But also the MPHEC provides quite a significant service to the provinces in terms of collecting data and analyzing data and writing reports as they relates to the data. And so for example, they just issued a study on quality, was it quality assurance? I forget the exact title of the study, but it was on the quality, some quality measures of the higher education system in the Maritimes.
Yes, the MPHEC is a good source of information and research about the post-secondary education system. What I had in mind really was the coordination of programs. Am I right in understanding that although the universities will have statutory authority to create degree-granting programs by virtue of being universities, that the general arrangement is that programs won't be funded by government unless they go through the MPHEC review process, which is designed to minimize duplication and overlap. Isn't that the essence of it?
You're correct. And the other element to that is that they won't be recognized for student assistance funding and that kind of thing.
Right. So there's a strong element of de facto coordination that goes on through the MPHEC. I wanted to follow up on the idea of mergers and affiliations as well, and I wonder if we could just bring ourselves up to date about this. There was passing reference to the Nova Scotia Agricultural College that was an independent entity, but is now fully integrated into Dalhousie. That's the situation there. Is that correct?
It's fully integrated.
Ms. McKenzie?
In terms of it being an independent institution, it was a line.
It was part of a government department.
It was part of government department.
Sure,
okay.
that's right. Yeah, but it very much operated as if it were a research institution, right? Okay, and teaching institution as well. What about the Atlantic School of Theology? Can you just bring us up to date about the Atlantic School of Theology? I'm afraid I've lost track of what's gone on with that.
Ms. Sopley?
In regards to its affiliation with other institutions?
Exactly.
So it has a close working relationship with St. Mary's University. In recent years, and in fact, through one of the projects that I talked about, the shared services projects through the Innovation Fund, it has a small amount of funding to look at how it might engage in more shared services with St. Mary's. So anything from common admissions to shared libraries to shared registration. It's exploring a number of ways that it might realize some efficiencies by working more closely with St. Mary's. No talk of merger at all, but more affiliation of shared services.
Okay, that's what I wondered. I'd lost track of it. I wasn't aware of a full merger, but I was certainly aware that it was coming more into the orbit of St. Mary's. There've been a few references to the MOU that exists between the government and the universities. I think we're in the midst now of our third. That is the third MOU that the governments have had with the universities. When does the current MOU expire?
In 15-16. We just started our second year.
Right. Okay. And can you tell me when there will be a renegotiation of the bins? My understanding is that bins is the term that's used to describe the relative weighting of the university programs for funding purposes. This is an allocation formula, that is a distribution formula, not a formula that generates absolute dollars, but has to do with the allocation amongst the different programs. Renegotiation of the bins, I think, has not taken place in some time. If you remember the last time it took place, perhaps you could tell us. But in any event, when will it next take place?
So do you want me to start? So you're completely correct in that the bin weights are assigned to the different programs, and it relates to the allocation of the funding as opposed to anything else. And we were speaking with some of the university presidents last night. There's no push from their end to reopen the bins and examine them. It's a huge task, obviously. There are one or two areas of interest in looking at the bins, but you can't, it's like a collective agreement. You can't open one or two bins without re-examining all of them, and there's no push from the universities to do that.
although I think a complaint that there's underweighting has come from NASCAD about its bins. Has that not been part of the dialogue back and forth?
I believe they're also overweighted on one other element. I can get that exact detail, but it's offset by another bin that overcompensates.
Can you give us examples of the relative weightings of different programs under the system?
They actually have a higher bin rating. Yeah, I don't know it. Okay.
Ms. McKenzie?
We can get you the detail, but I'm going to give you my limited understanding that at the time that the bin weights were set, there was a recognition that there was a higher weight was put on studio for NASCAD.
I wasn't actually just asking about NASCAD. I meant to illustrate how the bin system works throughout the university system.
Ms. Opley?
We're going to have to get you more information.
We'll have to get you that.
Right.
Sorry,
but
it's quite detailed, and we don't
yes,
have
but
it.
they're in multiples of each other. So, for example, I think the medical school is a much higher weighted per student bin than an undergraduate program in history, for example.
Yeah, it ranges from Bachelor of Arts to medicine, and you're right, that's the spectrum of the bin weights.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Epstein, I believe Mr. Scabar has a few questions.
Yes. How many more minutes do we have in this?
You have until 10:53. Not a lot of time left.
Okay. All right. I have just a couple of other questions, then I'll pass it to my colleague. There was some talk about the prospect of employment by graduates. This certainly seems to be part of the point about looking at the university system and thinking about it in the context of what goes on at the community colleges and the prospects. Am I right in thinking that the lifetime earnings of university graduates are still very significantly higher than those of people who have either high school education only or have community college qualifications only? Is that correct?
Ms. McKenzie?
You're correct. Their university and higher do have higher lifetime earnings. There has been a lot of recent articles about the difficulty, even for students with high school degrees, university degrees, to attach to the labor market. They may be finding themselves underemployed in a variety of different things. So that is a phenomena that we're paying attention to.
Yes, but
overall, any statistical report would tell you that you're better off if you graduate from university.
yes, and in fact, I saw statistics, but they were for the U.S. That university graduates fared much better in the recession in terms of employment than those who did not have university degrees. Did you see statistics like that, or are you aware of them for Canada?
We can get them for you for, well, I'll have to look to see if we have them for Canada. But in addition, there's I'll get you the statistics.
That's fine. Thank you. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Scabar from Cumberland North.
Mr. Scabar?
Thank you. There were a number of things, but I'll just kind of skip right to the quick. A short time ago, we were speaking about the requirement of many employers for 2 years of experience after graduation. My thoughts on that initially were, well, that's fine as long as you have a sufficient cadre of qualified people that do have 2 years of experience. When the time comes that there are not anymore, well, then what? Like, are we revisiting that? And who are we? Like, who are, like, is it the public service? Is it the private industry? Is everyone looking for that? And, like, is that an issue?
It absolutely is an issue that we may be asking for experiences that is not required. And I can tell you that everyone from the public service, so currently we're looking at what our requirements are for engineers, for instance, in transportation infrastructure renewal, through to the City of Halifax just recently announced that they're clearing and creating spaces for 30 new interns to make sure that people have the opportunity to onboard with employers, through to the private sector, where I've heard a number of different organizations throw out the challenge to their membership, including Andrew Boswell, who just came in through the Chamber of Commerce, threw out a challenge at the dinner to say, hire a young person. So there is challenging people to go back and look at the requirements that they've put in place, see if they really need them, if there's things that they can do that can help people, support people to be hired.
So the thing is, where are they going to get the experience if every job requires experience?
Well, that's, I think, the point. So if they can't, it doesn't necessarily require experience. So for instance, when I go to hire a junior researcher, it requires 2 to 4 years experience. I believe that we could hire Masters of Public Administration students, and I trust that they could come in and start in those junior level positions. So we're having conversations with the Public Service Commission about what those opportunities are. In addition, we also have introduced, the government has introduced the START program, which is an incentive program that allows young people to be hired through incentives to employers to give them that crucial first experience. So we're trying to come at it from a number of different angles.
Now, I have a couple of circumstances of which I'm aware that a graduate in psychology is trying to get their master's in counseling, but I could sort of understand why they would look at requiring a couple of years of field experience, like dealing with target populations before being accepted into a master's degree. And again, that resonates. I can understand that. But in terms of, for example, nursing, it's something that is taught in the curriculum. So does that count towards the years of experience?
Yeah, I would say that the challenge hasn't necessarily been for nursing. It would be because those are professions that you're moving directly into the workforce, and we have a demand for nurses. It's more along the lines of positions like if you graduate with a BCom or those types of things. What can we do through this government has tripled the number of co-ops and internships that are available, which give students that crucial experience that they're going to need to start to build their resume. So they're more with, if you will, it's the BComs, the Bachelor of Arts, the students that are graduating that would like to attach to the labor force to get that first experience. We're looking for creative ways and putting challenges out to encourage people to hire young people.
Is that one of the, or part of the thought process, but from at least some of the universities to accepting the first 2 years of community college as the credit towards a university degree? Like I'm thinking about, like accounting courses, or if I understand correctly, there's at least some dialogue between 2 years of LPN training being applied towards a nursing degree at St. FX?
I'm not familiar with that particular one, but I am familiar with the, like I said earlier, the business diploma being recognized at St. Mary's and at Mount St. Vincent, moving towards the BCom. We have a number of articulated programs. Tourism would be one from the community college into Mount St. Vincent. There's a number of those articulation programs that are being put in place, and I'm quite enthusiastic about them. That's a great opportunity for people to either leave with a diploma, work for a little while, or move straight into getting a degree.
Well, from a practical experience perspective as well, for a number of years was a professional social worker, but moved quickly into administration, social work administration program. Now, when I was hiring, depending on the job, I would be looking for someone with a human services diploma, frankly, before a university degree, because I knew those people actually dealt with clients. They had more, 2 years of experience, basically. Now,
order, please. Unfortunately, your time has expired. Thank you very much. I give the deputy an opportunity to make up some wrap-up comments. And
I guess I'll wrap up by starting at the beginning and apologizing for not being here on time. I appreciate the depth and the quality of the questions that we've had today. I appreciate that Lori joined us. She is our financial wizard from the department, and that Ava was able to field so many of the questions so well. So thank you very much. And this is a conversation that we'll be having well into the future, I anticipate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very informative today. Just one thing, I understand there's going to be an out-of-town caucus on the June the 5th, is that correct? And I would suggest that possibly you could move the June the 5th meeting into September, if that's agreeable with everybody. Beg your pardon? It's the NDP Caucus will be out of town. Was the June the 5th meeting.
And just trying to figure out what the topic was for June 5th. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. And our next meeting will be the Auditor General in camera on May 22nd. And if there's no other business, a motion to adjourn is in order. Thank you, Mr. Epstein. We stand adjourned.